where I am going live every weekday, and I'm going to be helping people on their recovery journey. It doesn't matter if you are still in addiction, if you're 20 years sober and you just want to connect with like-minded people, or you're still in the trenches. Come join. I am going to be answering questions to tell you a little bit about myself. So my name's Ashley Bloxham. I am a therapist, so I've got 2 counselling degrees. I'm definitely a therapist. I'm an addictions counsellor and I specialise in trauma and addictions. I also somebody who's overcame addiction, so I am nearly 4 years sober from drugs. I've recently quit alcohol. I had stopped for nearly a year because I was drinking socially, and then I started again a little bit, and then I've decided to just knock it on the head. So I'm somebody who gets that, and I'm also the loved one of people who have addiction, and obviously have loved ones who struggled with addiction. So I literally understand it from all angles. I've got a master's in addiction, and I was doing my PhD in women's addiction. So within that, I was learning a lot about the policy. So I'm pretty much a pro at addiction. So today, the topic that I'm going to be talking about is reaching your potential. I think that when we are in the midst of addiction, one of the problems that we have is that we feel like we are failing. And as soon as you realise you've got an addiction, and then you decide, actually, I'm going to pull this in a little bit, actually. As soon as you realise you've got addiction and you decide you want to stop, every time that you don't, you feel like you failed yourself. Every time you think about, okay, addiction's really ruined my life, you feel like you failed yourself. And you kind of stack up all these internal failures, which then really impacts your self-worth. And that can be really difficult. So what we need to do is we need to start stacking up the wins. Now, when I think back to my addiction recovery from drugs, I had a particular drug addiction, but to be honest with you, I've struggled with being addicted to mind-altering substances my whole 20s and early 30s. But one of the things when people ask, how do you get sober, that I'll say is I got sober, I got into recovery before I actually stopped. And the way that I did that is I learned to love myself before I got sober. And what was so helpful about that is if you can love yourself at a point where internally you despise yourself, you're learning to love yourself at the hardest. And to be honest with you, learning to love myself during addiction was actually harder for me than stopping addiction. But what I did is I kept on just stacking up little tiny things which were acts of self-love, and I just really started to learn to love myself. And it got to a point where I loved myself so bloody hard that by the time I got to the point of letting go of addiction, it was hard, but it was also easy, because I love myself enough to say, actually, I deserve better. I'm worth more than this. So I always feel like I got sober before I got sober. And I continued on this journey. Hi, I've just seen the comments. So I was addicted to ketamine. Yeah. And like I say, I was addicted to mind-altering substances, though, is what I later found out with my psychiatrist. But what I found was I just learned to love myself so much that became something more important than the addiction. Good morning. I know, it is a good morning, isn't it? Every day is a good morning for me. I tell myself that even if it's not. So yeah, so I think that the best thing that we can do in recovery, especially if you're still in a place of wanting to stop but not being able to, is stop seeing it as I've got to stop the addiction, but start to recognize that if I loved myself, I wouldn't be doing it. And this is a really good question to ask yourself. If I loved myself, like unconditionally, and to love myself to bits, would I be doing this? Because I'm doing something that I hate that makes us feel like I'm failing as a person. Oh, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. 2 seconds. I learned a lesson yesterday. It went quiet, someone rang us. Do not disturb. Is that working, my sound? Because yesterday when I went off my phone, the sound stopped working. But yeah, forget where I was at. I got a notification. Hey Frankie, is this working? So yeah, if anyone's got any questions about addiction, feel free to ask. Oh, thank you very much. That's good to know. Yeah, if anyone's got any questions about addiction recovery or where you're at on your journey, let us know. But yeah, I think for me, I definitely got sober before I got sober. And I think that it's really important, no matter where you're at in your journey, to really focus less about the addiction and more about loving yourself. And you said best way to beat addiction isn't about thinking about the addiction itself. Yeah, it's not. The addiction's a symptom. I say this all the time. It might as well be my slogan, but it's so true. It's a symptom. I had someone comment on one of my videos saying, how do you know what it's a symptom of? And I would argue that it's a symptom of some kind of psychological wound, but it's some kind of pain that we're trying to heal. And when you look at it like that, it really does become less about the addiction itself, and it becomes about the wound. So what I've just been talking about around loving yourself, regardless what psychological wound has happened, often the result of that psychological wounding is that we're in pain, and for some reason we don't have enough love and compassion towards ourselves, because often it happens in childhood. So yeah, and sometimes as well, one of the things is we beat ourselves up about not being able to get sober, and that's so counterproductive, because when we feel rubbish, the first thing we're going to do is lean into the addiction to make us feel good, because it's relieving psychological pain. So if we're then causing ourselves pain by berating ourselves for having an addiction, it's so counterproductive. Like, if you can learn to love yourself whilst you're having the addiction, that is going to set you up to not have an addiction. And even if you're in recovery, if you're sitting there holding on to shame around the addiction, that can really inhibit your ability to sustain recovery. So again, it's about loving the fact that you've had an addiction and being compassionate. So one of the things that I would say to myself is, of course you've got an addiction, Ashley. Like, of course you've got an addiction. Have you seen what you've been through? Have you seen what your life is right now? Like, no wonders you've got an addiction. And as soon as I started to reframe it like that, which was coming from a place of self-love and compassion, it was actually began to have less of a hold on us. And I began to love myself enough to replace it. So every addiction I've had, I've replaced with something different, something more in alignment with the version that loves myself. Which again, I'm not saying it wasn't easy to stop. It's not for the faint-hearted, don't get us wrong. But I love myself enough to be able to charge through it. And I started loving myself enough to pick something more in alignment, something that I'm proud of, something that I enjoy, something that's challenging, because I knew that actually I'm pretty mint. I'm not going to lie, I'm pretty bloody amazing. Right, let's have a little look. How am I doing? I'm doing good. I'm from Newcastle in England. Where are you from? Think I have a new addiction, listen to your voice and look in your eyes. Oh, that is a healthy addiction. Do you know what I always say as well? And I've quit quite a few addictions. So I've quit some big ones. I've quit drugs. Like ketamine was the one which really had us, that was stuck in for years. Like waking up day in, day out, scared to death that I'm never going to be able to get over it. Bladder issues, Ket was the one that got us. But I quit drugs, alcohol, and sugar. That was a big one. But I've still got little mini addictions. Not so much something that's every day, but I notice when I'm struggling, I lean into things like social bloody media. I still vape. So there's still some things that I struggle with, but they're not as bad. And it tends to be an opportunity to think, why am I leaning into this unhelpful coping mechanism? And it's usually an opportunity for us to see what's going on in my life. And I get to look at that and change that. But yeah, I was just saying that because you said you're addicted to listen to my voice. I've got healthy addictions now though. And that is jiu-jitsu, going to the gym, eating well, helpful podcasts. That's when I know that I'm not right, if I'm listening to social media instead of podcasts. Hi from Korea, West Yorkshire. I'm actually from Sheffield originally. Yeah, I'm a born and bred Yorkshire lass, but I moved over here when I was really young, so I don't sound like one. Yeah. So where's the people at? Has people struggled with addiction? Is people in recovery? Are you just floating about social media and see YouTube and seeing where the wind takes you? From Manchester. Oh, I like a Manc accent. I've got a friend from Manchester. She makes us laugh. Everything sounds funnier. I'm sure people think that about me though. It's something novel, isn't it? Somerset. I've never been to Somerset. Durham. Yes, I actually live in Durham. I live in Pelton. So you probably may or may not know that. I don't really know Durham that well. Yeah. So, loving yourself. What happens when you start to love yourself, even if that's before you get sober, is you then get to a point where you're like, right, I'm actually going to be sober. I'm going to take that jump, and it feels a bit easier because you're like, do you know what it is? I've got my own back here. I know that I'm a mint person. I know that I love myself, so I've got my own back. We're going to do this together. Saying it like a third person, but I feel like sometimes an addiction feels like a third person. It's like this thing that's like taking residence in your brain, driving you down the wrong path. So you start to love yourself, and then you manage to get sober. And for me, I just kept on loving myself. And then I started getting to a point where I'm like, hang on a minute. Oh, Arniston Centre. Yes, I know it. I'm not moved to Pelton that long ago, to be honest, to Durham. So that was an act of self-love. But yeah, so you start to love yourself, and then you start to think, okay, well, first of all, I've overcome addiction, so I'm mint. I can do that. I'm like some boy, some girl. So you do that, and then you start to think like, well, if I'm not going to accept that, I'm certainly not going to accept this. And you go on this self-love journey, and you don't, not only do you let go of addiction, but you start letting go of people, of places. So like I lived in a place that wasn't really helpful to me. I didn't have the right support, so I uprooted. I moved over here in Durham, which is lovely. And you just start to choose yourself. So you go from a place of despising yourself in addiction to thinking, right, I'm going to love myself at my worst, to then getting out of it, and then you continue loving yourself because you realise that's a good thing to do. And then you start loving yourself even more and thinking, actually, I'm going to do something I enjoy instead of doing a job I don't like. I'm going to get rid of those crap friends who are holding us back. I'm not going to accept this from a boyfriend or girlfriend if you have girlfriends. And you start to switch your whole life around. And there's a lot of people that I've met who have came out of addiction recovery, and you're like, wow, like they're smashing life. And I think it comes back to, if you can love yourself to do that, you are pretty unstoppable. And it takes so much to be able to love yourself when you're struggling. It takes so much to get over addiction as well. Anyways, what's other people's experience of it? Because this is mine. I'm interested to know. Yes, man, War Geordie. I just saw your comment there. Right, what else have I got? Yeah, also, Bellasaurus said the best way to beat addiction isn't about thinking about the addiction itself. Yeah, I think on a different level, one of the best things that I did is find things that I enjoy to replace the addiction with. So I actually sat next to someone in Greg's. And I always attract people who are in addiction recovery. And I don't know how, I must have some kind of beacon on the top of my head. Literally, taxi drivers, everything. But I was sat next to somebody in Greg's, and they were saying that they do talks that go around all universities in the UK, and they do talks about addiction. And he said one of the things that he finds really helpful and tells people is, if you think about addiction being a wall, and it's full of bricks, and when you take the addiction out, you're taking these bricks out, and if you don't replace those bricks, this wall's gonna collapse. So you need to have something to replace it with. So going back to this idea of don't think about the addiction, I think, yeah, don't think of it as an addiction you've got to solve. It's an issue of like wounding, trauma, and self-love. But also don't think about the addiction like in real time. Try and find something that you enjoy that you can actually distract yourself with. So find something that you like, actually, this is more in alignment and I really enjoy it. And I know for a fact that I'm not going to be performing at my best if I do the addiction as well as this. So yeah. Anyways, I just thought I'd pop on and talk about my little view on you have to get sober first. If anyone's got questions, will be happy to answer. But if not, I think I'll end it soon. Way of living keeps my addictions. Yeah. But you're saying your way of living, what do you mean that? Because if we're going back to, and obviously I don't know you, so a bit more information might change what I would say to this. But just on a surface level, thinking back to my addiction, my way of living was keeping my addiction. But going back to the idea of self-love, I wasn't living a life that reflected somebody who loved themselves. You know, I had rubbish people around us who were putting us down, making sly digs. You know, they weren't inspiring us and propelling us forward. They were making us feel rubbish about myself. I was running myself into the ground, trying to do far too much. I was people pleasing. I was putting everybody's needs above my needs. You know, I had all this love for everybody else, but I didn't have any for myself. Yeah, I was living with people who were just like, no wonders why I had an addiction. Like, it was just dramas all the time. So like my life was like, I always think a good way to see how much you love yourself is to take stock of your environment, because it reflects back to you who you are. Like your friends, that's reflecting back to you who you are. Like if you've got friends who disrespect you, then that's reflecting back to you that I don't have enough self-love to put in boundaries, or to get friends who treat me the way that I treat them. Or family, yeah. I mean, look, this might sound controversial. I'm not telling anyone what to do. I'm certainly not telling you what to do. But it did get to the point where I loved myself so fiercely that I actually had to cut family members out. And I actually don't speak to much. I've got some family members I speak to, but it was just everyone. I went through this process of loving myself so much that I started, when I was in this place of self-love, I thought, I'm clearly like, these aren't the people around us who I would have around us if I loved myself, or I'm allowing people to treat us the way that I wouldn't if I loved myself. Like, I'm not saying I got rid of everyone, but I had to put in boundaries with everyone and then see what happened from that. It was a process. But the more I loved myself, the more I realised that their needs are just as important as mine. Now, what I actually found with some people was the reason why people were behaving the way that they were was because I was allowing it. And it was actually just about, speaking up and saying, I don't enjoy it when you do this. Like, and I'm not saying this is what you have to do, but this is certainly what I had to do. See, I don't love myself. I love them more. Yes, that's what I was like. 100%. And is that really helpful to the people that you love? Like, one thing I realised was that I actually wasn't that great of a person to these people in my life. Like, I know this was something that I saw and it stung. You know when you have something that you watch and it's like holding a mirror up to your face and you're like, or a microscope up on your personality and you're like, I don't like what I'm seeing here. I don't like that, but you can't unsee it. So I saw this thing and it said about people pleasing, because I've always struggled with people pleasing and I still sometimes go back into that frame of mind and I have to pull myself out. But it actually said that you're not actually loving them fully, because we can't help it. If we're people pleasing and we're doing stuff for other people, like, and then we're getting annoyed by them, we're not being authentic. But also we're starting to harbour resentment towards them, because if we're just saying, like, do you know what it is, I don't love myself enough to put in boundaries, and then they're just like trampling all over you, you're going to get a level of resentment, even if it's pushed right the way down. So actually, it's in everyone's best interest for you to love yourself and to put in those boundaries. I started small though, and it started with just loving myself, just doing things that really helped us love ourselves. And we don't need to be cutting people out straight away, and we don't need to be moving to a different county. But for me, it started off by just, when I go to do something, praising myself for it, the little wins. So like every day I would just sit there and reflect on what have I done today, and it would be like, okay, do you know what it is today? Yeah, you're struggling with addiction, but you got up and you went and did that kind thing to someone. You still managed to go get up and get through the day, and you smiled at someone else. And I started to do little things that I could be proud of, because I was reflecting on what I was proud of. I started to do more and more things to be proud of. So in the beginning, it was scraping the barrel of what I loved about what I had done that day and who I was. And this is another thing that I used to say to myself all the time is, even though you've struggled with addiction, you've still managed to keep your heart. Even though you've had all this trauma and you've had all these horrible things this happened to you, you're still pouring love into other people, even though you're actually drowning in pain yourself. And like that, like, I love that about you, Ashley. I get you, yeah. Yeah, and this is it. It's just about starting off small, that same love you pour into other people. Carve some time out to pour it in yourself. Think about, what would you say if you were one of those people that you love? So one of the things that I found before I had an addiction, I've got a friend, and I actually co-host a podcast with her, which we do every Sunday, called Sunday Service. And we spoke about this last week. And she actually told us that she had an addiction before I had an addiction. I recreationally used drugs and alcohol every day, but I didn't have a specific addiction, and I didn't identify as having an addiction. And I remember when she told us, I didn't have 1 ounce of judgment in us toward her. I was just like, oh my God, like, this wonderful, beautiful human being is really struggling, and I had no idea. And when I got my own addiction, that memory always stuck out to us, because I thought I had so much compassion and zero judgment towards somebody who I loved, yet I've got zero compassion and so much judgment towards myself who's struggling with addiction. So I started again just to reframe how I viewed my addiction, and started to say, like, of course you're struggling with addiction, Ashley. Like, wow. Like, I'm surprised you're still here and you're still going. But, like, do you know what it is? You've still got a big heart and you're lush. And, you know, anyone who is you, who's been through what you've been through, would be using this thing to alleviate that pain. So I started being really kind to myself, and that's a good place for self-love to flourish, self-kindness. Yeah. Try and do something. I'm going to set you the task, unknown, of going into the unknown of learning to love yourself, and try and just every day do a self-kindness, an act of self-love towards yourself. And also self-love looks like doing little acts of service for people, you know, like sitting on the bus and you've got that elderly person chatting away to you and just talking to them, listening to what they've got to say, knowing that that's like a really nice interaction for them, or smiling at somebody, you know. I mean, these little things are all things that you can then at the end of the day praise yourself on. And every day I'm setting you the task of sitting there and praising yourself for the little wins and reflecting on how have you loved yourself today. And what could you do tomorrow to better love yourself? And honestly, the more you love yourself, the less hold that addiction will have, and the more grit and determination you'll gather so that you can push yourself over that finish line and sustain it. Yeah. Anyways, guys, I'm going to leave it there. I just thought I'd quickly pop on. I'm trying to just commit to coming on every day, but I've got a bit of a cold this week, but I had made that commitment to myself. That's another thing, making commitments and sticking to it, like achievable commitments though. So sometimes I used to set huge commitments that were unattainable. So now I try and just do little commitments, like I'm going to go on for 15 minutes, and if I stay on longer on YouTube, great. If I don't, I don't. I'm writing a book. I'm going to write 15 minutes, spend 15 minutes writing my book. So like little achievements, commitments that I know I can win. Because part of the problem with addiction is you keep recommitting to yourself to stop. And then when you don't achieve that commitment, then you feel like you're failing. And again, this is why it's better to set the commitment of, I'm going to love myself out of addiction. So I'm just going to love myself today. That's all I'm going to do. And I'm going to trust that I'm going to get to the point where I love myself so much that I wouldn't possibly be engaging in that, because that isn't in alignment with addiction, isn't aligned with somebody who loves themselves. It's just not. So yeah. Anyways, I've done my little commitment for today. Set little commitments, love yourself. Addiction is the symptom, it's not the problem. So think of the problem as self-love and try and rip it out of the root and heal it to the core. You've got this. And yeah, and speak to you soon. Bye.